This is Dennis Gill with the Americans in Wartime Museum. Today's date is 14 May 2015, and I'm conducting an interview with Phillip Adair. We are in Knoxville, Virginia. Sir, if you could state your name and date of birth.
Phillip R. Adair. I was born on the 15th of April, 1920.
And what war were you, where were you, first of all, where were you born?
In Oklahoma,
Oklahoma.
a small town called Tuttle,
Tuttle.
very close to Oklahoma City,
Gotcha. And what?
right in Tornado Alley.
Tornado Alley. Yep. Know it well. What war were you in, and what branch of the service?
I was in World War II, and originally it was the U.S. Army Air Force, and then became the Air Corps, and then when they activated the U.S. Air Force, I was in the first increment that came in.
Okay. Before we get into your service, do you have any other family members that served in the
Yes.
military?
My older brother served 26 years. He was in the Navy. He was a medical officer. He was on the Enterprise all during World War II, what they call the Galloping Ghost. And he saw a lot of action, or the results of a lot of action. A good bit of the time he was below decks. He told me that once they had a 1,000-pound bomb come through the deck into the wardroom where he was working and made quite a mess.
Sure it did. Sure it did. What did you do prior to your service?
I was working for a jobber selling candy, cigarettes, tobacco, miscellaneous items, driving a truck around Wyoming. I did that for 3.5 years.
Okay. Our involvement in World War II obviously began with Pearl Harbor. Do you remember that day and what your thoughts were when you heard about it?
Yes, I was worried about my brother.
He
I
was already
didn't
in the
know
Navy.
until sometime later that his ship, the Enterprise, had escaped any heavy damage during that particular day. But they saw a lot of damage later on.
So your brother was stationed at Pearl Harbor?
He was on the Enterprise,
On the Enterprise,
on the
okay.
aircraft carrier.
I got you. And when did you join the military?
It was in 1941. As soon as they announced that they were accepting applications for the U.S. Army Air Corps, myself and a friend of mine went straight down to join. That was in December of 41.
Now, did you try to join the Army Air Corps prior to that?
Yes.
And what happened with that?
I was a 17-year-old farm boy, no college, and we lived fairly close to Post Field at Lawton, Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
So I went up to the small landing strip that they had, and there was a lieutenant in there. He didn't pay any attention for a while, and finally he turned around and said, "What do you want, Sonny?" I said, "Well, I'd like to know how I get in this outfit." He said, "Well, the first thing you need to do is go get yourself 2 years of college and come back, and maybe we'll talk to you then." He might as well said, "Go to the moon first." I lived on a farm. We weren't poor. We just didn't have any money.
Right.
We lived quite well on the farm.
And then after Pearl Harbor, they were happy to take you.
Yes, they weren't so picky.
Now, what did you do in the Air Corps? What was your primary assignment?
Well, I went through flying school on the West Coast, Zach Mosley contract school for primary and basic, and then I went to Luke Field for advanced. The two contract fields, the instructors were civilians that were hired to do the instructing, and they were quite good. When I went to the advanced course, I had already been flying some before I went into the Air Corps. I didn't tell anybody that, but I did. And it turned out that the instructor I got for advanced training, the last one, graduated in the class before me. And I think I knew more about flying than he did.
Right. Right.
One of those things.
Right. And how long was flight school? Time you entered until they give you an airplane?
January 42. I signed up in December 41 and went into training in January 42. And it was March before I actually got my hands on an airplane.
Okay. And then from there, where do you go from there?
Well, I had primary and basic at a contract school, Cal Air Academy at Ontario, California. Mm-hmm. And from there, I went to Luke Field to what they call the Advanced Fighter Training School at Luke. And when I graduated from there, I was assigned to the 80th Fighter Group on Long Island. And I remember I reported for duty on the 7th of September. And they told me, you'll find a Major I can't think of his name now. I will in a minute, but they said he's on the flight line in the hangar. You report to him and he'll tell you what to do. So I did that, and he said, well, go get yourself a room in a BOQ and come back tomorrow. And when I came back the next day, they said, well, he's already gone. He's on his way to England. And I reported to another officer, a Captain Verl D. Luring, and it turned out he was a squadron commander of the 89th Fighter Squadron, which I was assigned to then. And we trained for quite a while there at Mitchell Field. And eventually we left there, and before we left, we flew there for a while at Mitchell Field. That's where I checked out in the P-47. And I remember very well, you had to use the brakes to taxi. With that big nose sitting up in front, you had to go back and forth to keep from running over somebody. And my calves were almost where I couldn't use the brakes anymore.
Right.
Finally, I got lined up on the runway, locked the tail wheel, hit the throttle, and before I knew it, I was in the air. And I remember thinking, man, I've got this damn thing in the air. How'll I ever get it back on the ground? But it turned out it was quite easy. It was a nice airplane to fly, honest.
Right.
It was quite a machine to handle, but that big old 13.5-foot prop
Right.
up there was pushed by a 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engine. It was a good airplane.
Now you complete your training in the United States. Where do you go from there?
Well, after we completed our training, we got on a, well, let's see, we went to Bird Field before we left the States. And when we got down there, General Arnold was there. He was the Commander-in-Chief of the Air Force. And he said, I have some news for you. Some of it you'll like and some of it you won't. He said, the first thing that you won't like is you're not getting P-47s. You're getting P-40s. And the second thing is, I can't tell you where you're going. He said, but it's a long way as to where you're going. And you may not think so, but it's an important part of the Air Corps' job at the time. And he was right. It took us 52 days aboard ship to get to from New York to Karachi, India. The port there wasn't big enough to handle even the small ship that we got off on.
Right.
So we had to take our personal bags, get down in the water, have them handed to us, and carry them through about 100 yards of water to get to the shore. And there we were. We wound up at a British training area called Malheur Cantonment. And we were there for quite a while, waiting for our ships that were coming in crates to arrive. Once they arrived, we had to get them assembled, and then we started flying from that base up into the valley in the Assam, far east, northeastern part of India.
What was your primary mission, your unit's primary mission while you were
Our
there?
primary mission when we got there was to fly a continuous patrol with 4 aircraft over a place that they call the Hump, which was the Himalaya Mountains. And the unarmed transports were flying supplies into China from the main base of Sukrating and also Chabu. And they were subjected to interception by Japanese fighters that would come up the Mekong and the Salween River Valley, climb up and shoot them down and get out. So we started flying patrols over that. And after a little while, they decided that wasn't a very good thing to do. And they stopped that and moved on down further. And eventually we moved down further too and started flying interdiction missions against the Japanese forces on the ground in northern Burma.
At some point, you've got all this training under your belt, and at some point you encounter the enemy for the first time. Do you remember that and what that was like?
Yes. I'll never forget that. It was the 13th of December, 1943. And I had just landed from one of those 3.5-hour patrols, and my crew chief had gotten me the aircraft service, and he was sitting in the cockpit when the alert sounded. I was in the alert rest tent about 100 feet away, and I ran to the aircraft. By the time I got there, he had it started, and I jumped up on the wing. He jumped out the other side. I got in it. I didn't buckle the belts or anything. I hit the throttle and was out. The people in ops told me, we checked you with a stopwatch, and for the time we sounded the alert until you were airborne, it was 25 seconds. I know it was longer than that. It probably took them a while to find the watch. But I did get off quite quickly. And it was quite some time before anybody came up to join me. And as a matter of fact, the Emmy was a formation of 24 bombers with 40 fighters for escort. And I spotted them fairly quickly, and I called control and told them where they were. And I said, no, they can't be right, they said. And they said, we have reliable reports from ground observers that they're 40 miles to the east of there. And I said, well, I'm 15 miles away, and I'm sitting up here looking at them, and they're flying northwest at about 345 degrees. And I think they're going to fly up the other side of the river. They're going to turn around and come back and bomb the hell out of you. And I estimate they'll be at the bomb release line at a certain time, and I gave them the time. And sure enough, that's where they were. So nobody came up to join me yet. And there was 24 bombers and 40 fighter escorts, 64 of them altogether. And I couldn't sit up there and watch them bomb the headquarters, the hospital, our living area, without at least doing something. So I started attacking them before they got there. And I couldn't tell for sure what kind of results there were. I was coming in at the same level they were, so that the bombers on the other side of the left flank couldn't fire at me because the left flank was in the way, and the right flank couldn't fire at me. So I got around behind after shooting at the left flank for a while and attacked him there. I got some good hits on one of the bombers, and I could see fire streaming out from the left engine. I know I shot that one down. And after I recovered from escaping, I went back up and was going to have another go at him, but this time the fighters saw me coming, and we got into scrape. And that went on for a while. And finally, I said, well, to myself, I said, I'm going to have another shot at the bombers. So I went into a dive and came screaming up at them, and just about the time I got almost in range, I was looking at them, and I happened to look down, and I saw a fighter coming straight up at me, shooting. And I looked at where his bullets were going. I thought, oh hell. About that time, It sounded like somebody threw a handful of gravel into a metal garbage can. And the fire shot up around both sides of the armor plate, but it went out right away. I knew I had been hit, but I didn't know how bad. So when I saw that I was able to still maneuver the airplane, I went back in to try to get some more shots at fighters and also at the bombers, but I couldn't get back to the bombers again. The fighters were there waiting for me, and they cut me off. And that went on for a while. I shot at the fighters from time to time. I did destroy one for sure and damaged two more. I couldn't tell how badly they were damaged because I had a fair overtake speed and I had to go under to keep from ramming. And finally, I got to a point where I didn't have any ammunition left. And I was about 125 miles away from home for that time. And the last time that I tried to make an attack, the fighters were coming at me pretty heavy. So I wound in a full nose down trim trying to make an outside G turn. I knew they couldn't follow that and hit me. And I got away from them. I finally recovered, and I found out that when I had full nose down trim, I got hit. And what they did was they severed the trim cable. So I'm up there 125 miles away from my home with full nose down trim. Not a good situation because P-40 is nose heavy anyway. So I'm flying along, and pretty soon I thought, man, I don't think I can hold this thing anymore. So I gripped the stick, holding it in both hands, gripped it with my knees, and I could go a little ways, but I was losing altitude. And I kept going until I was down pretty close to the trees. And I thought, well, if it keeps going this way, I'm going to be in the jungle pretty quick. So, as long as it slows down, I'll turn it upside down and let it climb until the engine loads up. And then I'll roll it over, let the engine smooth out again, back on my back again. And I don't know how many times I did that, but finally I got pretty close to the base, and I was coming in from the wrong direction. The anti-aircraft people almost shot me down. They decided there's something wrong. They said, well, we saw wheels coming out of the top of the airplane. And we thought, what the hell is that? Well, I still had my gear down. So I flipped it over and made sure the gear was down and locked. And about that time I was on the ground there. I just let it roll and shut it off there. And I was so tired that I couldn't get out of the airplane. They had to help me out. But I didn't get hit at all. The airplane suffered a few holes in it. But I never was wounded in that fight at all.
How long do you estimate it was just you and the enemy before you had some of your comrades come up and help you out? Because you said it was you for a while.
I never saw anybody else. And our particular squadron that day, we were supposed to be flying patrol over the hump to protect the transports. Another squadron, the 88th, was responsible for defense of the valley. And they had a full squadron to get up and attack the Japanese that were trying to bomb us. But for some reason, I couldn't seem to find them. It was hazy. You couldn't see very far that day.
Right.
And so they didn't find them until they were clear out of the area, and they were almost out of fuel. So they had to come back and land. They did shoot down 1-0.
How long were you stationed there, at that location? For the duration of the war, or did you?
Yes, well, not the duration of the war, but we were there for quite some time. And eventually we traded our P-40s in for 4 P-47s. And I was one of the people that loved the P-47. A good many of the replacement pilots that we got in were afraid of the P-47. They said it was a widowmaker. But to me, it was a very stable airplane. It was a bit of an airplane to handle, but it was a good, honest airplane. And the little grass strip that we were flying off of was 3,100 feet long, 60 feet wide, which is a small field for P-47. So it joined a depot that had a big, long concrete strip. That's where most of the people took off from. And they said, the replacement pilots that came in said, there's no way you can fly a P-47 into this strip. And I said, well, you're wrong there. Oh, yeah? Well, I'll show you. I said, I'll come in and I'll have it on the ground by the time I get to the ops building, which was halfway down the runway that was 3,100 feet long. I said, I'll be on the ground by the time I get there, and I'll be stopped before I get to the end. And I did that. And they couldn't believe it. And finally, when I'd been there a while, I said, well, this airplane will take off from here without any problem. And I said, I'll come by the ops shack, which is halfway down the 3,000-foot runway with the wheels in the well. And I did. So they couldn't argue with that anymore.
Right. Any other encounters stick out in your mind aside from the very first one?
Yes. Yes. At one time, I was leading a flight of P-40s with an external fuel tank underneath the belly of the airplane and a bomb on each shackle on the wings. And we were trying to make a surprise attack on a Japanese encampment there. And before we could get there, I looked up and I saw a flight of 3 flights of 4 zeros and one flight of 3 was 15. And I called my flight and told them to make sure that the armament switches were on. But before they encountered the zeros to drop the bombs, but not pull the arming wires on them so they wouldn't explode. And about that time, I looked, and this group, I don't know where they came from, but they were really pros. And they had looked at us and picked out which ones were going to go after certain ones. And they didn't come for me. They came for number 2. And I tried to get around to shoot at one that was on his tail, but I couldn't pull it tight enough. And I said, well, fly into the clouds, which he did. And I followed him in, but I couldn't see him in the clouds. So I came back out, and we were in a sort of a valley with hills around it except to the south. And the weather in there was good, with a ceiling about 4,500 to 5,000 feet. So there was room to maneuver in there. But anytime I came out of the clouds, there was always 4 zeros waiting for me over there. And I couldn't run from them because I knew they were faster than I was. I knew they could outturn me. The only option I had was to come head on with them. So the first flight that I saw, I was going head on at them, and number 1, 2, and 3 peeled off before they were in range. Number 4 kept coming, and I waited until he was, I figured, was about 1,000 feet away, and I had him dead on. I squeezed the trigger, and the airplane just blew up. Those 650 calibers really made a mess out of it.
Right.
And we were there for some time, in and out of the clouds. And I was trying to protect my guys as much as I could and to survive myself. And finally, I couldn't see any of my troops. And I was really concerned because I hadn't lost anybody yet. And finally, the enemy aircraft, I think there was 5 of them left, they turned and went home. And after I circled a little bit, I headed back, and pretty soon I saw an airplane up north. And at a distance, it was hard to tell whether it was one of ours or one of theirs. So I approached it carefully. It was my wingman. And he was all hunched over the stick. And I looked at his airplane, and they'd made a shambles out of it. And he made a sign for his instrument panel, no instruments. So I knew he was going to have trouble. So I came up and signaled to him to fly on my wing. We headed home, and I thought, well, 2 of us survived anyway. And we'd been going about 5 minutes after I picked him up, and I heard a call, bamboo red leader. This is bamboo number 3. I'm up at Sadia. I'm shot up pretty bad. I don't know whether my tires are any good or what's wrong with the airplane. I don't see any leaks. Could you possibly come up and look at me? And I said, well, you're not a lot out of the way. I hate to do it with my wingman because he shot up pretty bad. And he said, well, I don't know whether I need to bail out or try to land this thing. So I made that little detour out, picked him up, and I said, well, I think your tires are flat, but otherwise you look okay. You got a lot of bullet holes in you. But it's still running and I don't see anything leaking. So we headed home, and the number 4 man, it was his first mission. And when he saw those Zeros attacking us, he went the other way. He went home, which probably was a smart thing for him to do. So all of ours got back. Some of theirs didn't. I don't know how many they lost. But that was quite a day.
Did you win any awards while you were in World War II?
Yes. Silver Star.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, I got the Silver Star for attacking the big bomber raid that came on the 13th of December.
So that was your first
The first enemy contact
right.
I had.
Contact.
And
Okay.
I didn't want to say, well, I've got 64 airplanes cornered up here. Will you come up and help me?
Right.
I called control and said, are there any friends in the area? I could sure use some help. No, we don't have any in the area. But they did, and I couldn't understand that. They had the whole damn squadron that they had control of, and they couldn't send them up to help me. And they finally found the raiders, but they were almost out of the area by the time they found them. I think they did shoot down one of them. I got a bomber and two Zeros out of it.
Out of your first encounter. How many confirmed kills did you have in World War II?
At least 6.
At least 6 confirmed. How many do you need to be an ace?
5.
5. You're a World War II ace.
Yeah.
From Burma, where do you go from there? How long were you there, first of all?
I was there 19 months.
19 months.
I had already flown the equivalent of 5 tours of duty.
And what would that? How many sorties is a tour?
25 tours was the standard when we got there. Some of the fighter outfit that we replaced went home with 25. Some stayed for 35. I had, in 2 months of flying, I think I had at least 40 missions. I know that because the day that I shot down the first aircraft. It was mission number 44, and strangely enough, my aircraft was stamped 44. That was the number. So I figured that's a pretty good number.
Okay.
I flew that airplane until it had 400 hours on it, and I went to the squadron commander. I said, that airplane is perfectly good. I know it's supposed to go to the depot at 400 hours, but I'm afraid that what I get won't be as good as this one is now. And finally he relented and said, okay, you can fly it to 440 hours, but after that, no more. So I had to give it up at 440 hours. And the one I got wasn't as good as that one was with all that time on it.
Of course.
Life.
So where do you go from Burma?
From Burma, rest and recuperation on the West Coast, and then went to Colorado Springs for an assignment to a tactical unit. So when I got there, they said, well, the only thing that we have available now is assignment to a SAC unit flying bombers. And I said, well, I'm a fighter pilot. I don't want to fly trucks. Well, we don't have anything for you. Come back tomorrow. So I came back tomorrow several times. And finally they said, we have one fighter outfit at Selfridge Field, Michigan. It's the 56th Battle Group that came back from England. And we could send you there. I said, please do. I'm ready to go. So that's where I went, and I was in the 56th there for overall about 5 years. We had P-51s to start with. Went through F-80s and to F-94B, which is the first radar-equipped fighter that we had. And they were still flying that when they called me and told me that I was getting orders to come to Colorado Springs to the headquarters. And I said, well, you can't do that. That's against the regulations. I said, my wife is 8 months pregnant, and she's not supposed to leave after 6 months. We'll waive that. Get yourself on up here. So we went, and when I got there, I'd driven up with the family. And when I got there, I said, here's your orders. You're going to be gone for 2 weeks. I said, what about my wife? She's almost due. And the lieutenant colonel that was my boss, he said, we'll take care of her. So I was gone when that one was born. And almost the same thing happened on the next one.
Were you married when you were in Burma?
No.
You were not married yet?
No.
Okay.
No, I met my wife on the train from Oklahoma to the Rest and Recuperation Center in Santa Ana.
Okay.
And I was there for a month. We got quite well acquainted during that time.
Right.
And later on we were married. We've been married 70 years now.
Wow. Wow. Congratulations. What was the rank that you achieved? Because at some point You're in the Army Air Corps, and then that becomes the
I
Air
was
Force.
still a second lieutenant
Okay.
when. No, I take it back. I was a first lieutenant. I'd just gotten promoted, but in the reserves. So I went into the first increment, and they said, well, you can come in as a first lieutenant at the same pay that you're getting now, but your permanent rank would be as a second lieutenant. So I went in that way,
Right.
in the first group that when they first activated the regular Air Force.
The Air Force. Okay. And where did that lead you? Once you went to the Air Force, where did that take you?
Well, when I first went in, I was going to training, and they sent me to Higley Field, Arizona, which is just outside of where Luke Field is now. And they didn't have any airplanes there.
Right.
So we planted grass and picked up cigarette butts
Right.
for about 6 weeks. I still had a pinstripe suit. They said, don't bring any extra clothes. We'll give you clothes when you get in.
Right.
So I wore that pinstripe suit for about 6 weeks. Oh, that was a mess.
And were you still flying at that time?
Oh, I hadn't started yet.
Hadn't started yet. Okay. So
No.
you went from P-40s. Is that your first aircraft?
Well, we went through trainers first,
Trainers.
but the first tactical aircraft wasn't a P-40. Was a P-47.
Okay. And what was the last aircraft that you flew in the Air Force?
The 104.
104. A jet. Okay.
I was a maintenance officer of the squadron in the first group that got jet aircraft. And we set up a lot of procedures for maintaining jet aircraft and figuring out how long you could go between inspections, what you had to do in the inspections, and our unit was foremost in flying hours. We did quite well.
Is there anything that stands out aside from your time in World War II? Is there anything else that stands out about your time in the military? Probably nothing compares to that.
No, nothing compared to it, but I was on an exchange tour with the Royal Air Force for a year, flying de Havilland Vampires and Gloucester Meteors. And I was assigned over there as an air weapons instructor in a school teaching squadron training officers for air warfare.
Right.
And that was an interesting and quite a pleasant tour.
Right.
We had to work hard, but it was fun.
Now you would have served. You served until 1971. Is that
Yeah.
correct? So you would have served both, not only World War II, but Korea and Vietnam.
Yes,
As well.
I was in, but I didn't serve in the front lines.
Right.
No, in Korea, when I came back from England. I'd been over there on the exchange tour that I mentioned. The first thing I did was go up and register for to go to fight again. And they said, well, the war's almost over. You're number 330 on the list. We'll never get to you.
Right.
Yeah, they were right. I didn't get back in as a combat pilot, but having accumulated quite a bit of jet experience and maintenance experience, I was assigned to the 4th Chinese Nationalist Air Wing on Taiwan as a maintenance advisor. And they had 3 operations advisors there, but they didn't have any combat experience. And when the Chinese found out that I did, it came to me and said, we're not getting anything that helps to shoot down the MiGs from our ops officers. They don't have any combat experience. We understand that you do. Would you be willing to try to help us? I said, sure. You give me a group of 5 people in 2 weeks, and I'll set up a course for them and we'll go through the things that I believe they need to know. We did that, and in the second bunch, I was demonstrating how you attack a MiG-21 with the F-84G, which is straight wing and subsonic. And I said, well, you have to get up well above them, surprise them, come straight down, not too far behind them, haul it out, and be close in so you can get up, shoot at them before you know they're back there. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble because you'll overshoot and they'll come after you. I was doing that one day, and the seat latch broke. And when it did, I hit the bottom, and I don't know how many G's I encountered, but it was a lot. And I was flying around unconscious for a while, and eventually I came to. And I was sort of laying on the right side. And the airplane was flying around just like it knew what the hell it was doing.
Right.
So I got back and landed, and I couldn't fly for a while. They wanted to send me home. I didn't want to go. And eventually I got where I could go back to flying, not quite as vigorously as I did before.
Right. How do you think that your experience, particularly your World War II experience, how do you think that affected your life as you look back?
I can remember a lot of things that I'd like to forget, but I can't. One of them was when one of my tent mates was trying to take off from Missional, which is a 4,000-foot strip made of rocks. And it was a very hot day. It was 135 degrees. And when he got to the end of the runway, he didn't have enough flying speed. So he wound up flipping over upside down and the aircraft caught on fire. We couldn't get him out. We had nothing to lift it with, and he burned to death there. I can still hear him screaming.
You think overall it's a positive experience? As far as how it affected your life, your wartime experience in general?
We were too busy. We just had to keep going.
Yeah.
No, we ran into a lot of things later. The British had their headquarters not too far from where I was stationed on temporary duty with another squadron in northern Burma. And the Japanese 15th Army was coming across Burma, heading for their headquarters, and they were getting pretty close. And finally they called and said, "It looks like they're going to make it here and take this headquarters unless you can help us." And I was flying with the P-51 outfit. So they flew some, and I flew a lot. As soon as I'd use up the ammunition, I'd come back and reload it. Sometimes I'd make 2 missions on one load of fuel. And we killed so many Japanese that you couldn't believe it. They were in an open field, no place to run.
Right.
And you do what you have to do.
Most people weren't alive.
Right.
Most people today weren't alive back then. They don't know. They only know what they've read in the newspapers, seen in the movies. What do you want people to know about your service and about your comrade service, those you served with?
Well, I was very fortunate to have a bunch of good people to serve with. That means a lot. If you can count on somebody, you know, it means a lot to you. You feel like you're more secure. We flew 2 pairs with 4 aircraft like this at a distance, so if one pair was attacked, you could come around and get a shot at the people that were coming up behind them, and that worked pretty well. They'd break off and go somewhere else.
Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you want to talk about or mention? Or I know there's a lot.
Well, a lot of our work was support for the ground forces, especially Merrill's Marauders. They really had a rough time. I think they lost probably 60% of their troops, and the rest of them were pretty sick. But they hung in there, and they captured Missional. And I was the first Allied fighter to land a fighter on Missional after they captured it. The strip was 4,000 feet long with the bomb crater that was right in the middle. I put it there. I almost went in it. And all my flight got in. And the reason we landed there was because all of our bases back in the valley were closed. They said, you can't land here. We can't even see the edge of the runway from the alert shack. So we had to stay there until finally they said, well, it's clear enough now that you can probably get in, but you'll have a rough time of it, but you can make it if you want to try it. So we did. I had a plan for getting back. There's a mountain it's the tallest mountain over there. I should be able to remember the name of it now. Probably 30 minutes ago I might have been able to tell you. But it was 29,000 feet. And usually you could see it from somewhere. And I always headed for that on a reciprocal that was 315 degrees. And when I got to where there was a mountain on my wingtip, I knew I was down in the area where the ground floor of the valley was level at 360 feet. So I would let down until I got to the treetops and fly on that course until I came to the river, the Brahmaputra River. And I would turn and fly down the river until I came to an island that had a C-46 that ran out of fuel and landed on the island there in the middle of the river. And at that point, I'd turn 45 degrees left and fly down the riverbank until I came to a dead tree. And I knew that the runway was just the other side of the dead tree, so I'd pull up that 20 feet and turn just past that tree, and I'd be right there at the runway. I had to use that a few times.
Right. Wow. It sounds like you have an amazing stories to tell about your time. I want to thank you for your service, most of all, and I want to thank you for giving us the time today to talk with you about it.
Well, I was glad to do it.
It's always great to hear from World War II vets, and they say they were the greatest generation. I can't argue with that. So.
Well, we were there and we tried.
Yep.
That's all anybody can do, is the best they can.
You're right. Right. Well, I want to thank you again for the Americans Wartime Museum. Thank you for your service.
You're
Thank
very
you for
welcome.
your time, sir.